Alright, hey guys. So a little bit of catch up. I've just been focusing on finals. Finished my finals for the rest of the week, I believe. I just have one online one. Um, but yeah, today's gonna be a little bit different. Um, I'm gonna be focusing mainly, or this video is just about backend development, project setup, specifically with Spring Boot and JWT authentication. And yeah, that's basically it. No camera today because I'm trying to fix my desk setup. But yeah, alright, let's start. So I already have something here to describe. Actually, let me start off with this, right? So here is what Spring Boot usually works off of. It's called a Spring container, I think. Don't quote me on that. But essentially all it is that, let's say you have these classes, right? So public class, food, right? Let's say you have these classes, right, in Spring Boot, and they have annotations on it, right? One could be a service, one could be a REST controller, so on. These annotations are more specifically to create this class as a bean, but also as documentation, right? We know that since this is annotated as service, okay, this is a service is going to hold the business logic of our project, right? If it was a repository, that means that this one is going to be simply interfacing with our database, right? If it was, let's say, a component, right, this is just broad, it could be for anything. If it was, what else? It could be for data, right? To say like this might be like a DTO, or data is also for Lombok, which is something that creates getters and setters for this class automatically, I believe. REST controller, right? Okay, so this is a controller, right? This is gonna hold all our endpoints, right? So this can be seen as documentation, but more importantly, whenever Spring Boot sees these annotations, it's gonna create a Spring Bean, right? And what a Spring Bean is essentially an instance of that class. So a Spring Bean slash instance. And so the reason why we do this is for dependency injection, right? So let's say in this part, right, I have foo. Spring Boot's gonna see that it's annotated with service, it's gonna create that Spring Bean instance, right? But let's say in a separate class, right? Let's say bar, right? This one needs a foo object, right? Typically, right, we would have to create the constructor for bar, right? Since bar depends on foo, right? This is a dependency right here, dependency. Then that means that we would have to inject foo into here, right? Typically we would do that by doing something like this, right? Where this.foo is equal to foo in Java, right? And yeah, but again, Spring Boot is for, I would say it's known for scalability, and scalability in the code environment as well, in terms of it really abstracts away all the unnecessary stuff. So by having the Spring container already registered, you actually don't need this constructor at all, right? What Spring Boot's gonna do, it's gonna say, oh, okay, I recognize that you need a foo class, right? Let me check my Spring container, right? Is my Spring container, oh, I don't know why it's, does my Spring container, let's make it curved, does my Spring container contain a foo class, right? And it does. So it's going to inject this foo class, right? It's going to inject this foo class. It's basically going to travel all the way over here and inject it, right? So boom, there's your instance of the foo class, right? You no longer need to create a constructor, pass it through, and so on, right? So it really reduces all the boilerplate code you need. Another instance, right, is, let's say, remember that data annotation I talked about, right? If I said baz, right, and it had, let's say, a int x string y and so on, the data annotation is again going to create this as a bean, right? But more importantly, it's also going to create these getters and setters for us automatically. Actually, no, sorry. I don't believe the data class creates a bean. I believe it just creates the getters, setters, and so on. So it removes all that boilerplate code. But yeah, I won't go too in depth about it. That's essentially how that works. There's other people on the internet that can explain it better, but that was my understanding. Now let's talk about the project setup, right? So before we get into it, right, this part, the project setup is mainly about Spring Security. Spring Security is simply just a framework within Spring Boot that allows us to handle security, right? Whether it's session tokens, JWT tokens, CSRF, right, and so on. So the way it works, right, is that on a high level, these are going to be your controllers, right? So these are just controllers that exist on your Spring Boot app, right? Again, controllers is just a fancy word for saying endpoints. Now let's say we had a client over here. The client wants to send a request and a response, right? Make Scarlet draw. Okay. Request, right, and response, right? So we send a request to Tomcat, we get a response back. What Tomcat is essentially it's the server that is handling our or it's the server that our Spring Boot application is sitting on or is living in, right? This Tomcat is responsible for routing requests and response. This Tomcat is responsible for managing a pool of threads, right? So Spring Boot is inherently multi-threaded, meaning that it can handle multiple requests and responses simultaneously. So that's basically what Tomcat is. It's basically just a server hosting our Spring Boot, right? And inside this Tomcat is where all your controllers are gonna live, right? So you have all your controllers. What's interesting though is that this Spring Boot apps have a front-facing controller, right? So I'm gonna just say FC for front-facing controller. What this essentially does is kind of acts like an API gateway or like a proxy, where this front controller is just going to route to these mini controllers that we have. Again, this is just the best of my understanding, so if someone's watching this, feel free to correct me. But this is the front-facing controller, and this is known as also a dispatcher, I believe. Again, don't quote me on that, just search it up. But yeah, so the idea that I want to introduce this though is because before the request hits the front-facing controller to map onto our endpoints, it's actually going to hit this first, right? It's going to hit our chain, our security chain. It's not the best. This will do. This is our security chain, right? Let me check if I'm recording. Alright, our security chain, right? And then after that, it finally maps on to. Give me 1 second. Holy shit. What? Alright, whatever. Alright, it finally maps to our front-facing controller, right? So the way that this works, right, let's say we have our little request right here. So this little guy is going to be sent over to a Tomcat server, and this right here is going to be our security chain, right? So this is where Spring Security comes in, right? It passes this request. Think of it kind of like middleware, honestly, where it goes to this first chain, does whatever, this first chain does whatever, so on, and then gets routed to this front-facing controller. Okay, what endpoint does this request want to hit? It wants to hit this endpoint. Boom. Okay, there, and then we handle all our business logic from there, right? So the part we wanted to focus on for this project setup is mainly going to be the Spring Security chain part, and specifically one of these chains is about JWT validation, right? Of course, before our request hits our controller, we want to we want to validate this request and run it through that JWT validation, and this will essentially act as our authentication, right? And so the way we're going to do that is, again, we're going to set up our own JWT validation, right? So for this project setup, right, I'm going to be using Supabase as our auth, right? I just think Supabase is just easy to work with. Of course, people can use BetterAuth and Amazon Cognito. That's just more setup, but in this project, we will be using Supabase. And I believe the idea should be similar nonetheless, but I'll walk you through the idea of validating your JWTs. So in order to validate your JWTs, right, let's say Supabase is our auth provider, right? So auth provider, right, and let's say that this is our client, the way that this works is that our client is going to sign in, right, via our auth provider, right? It could be OAuth, it could be something else. Typically through OAuth, they give us a code, in some type of code that's encoded into the URL on the callback URL, and that code is going to be exchanged for a JWT token via a middleware, right? So for instance, Next.js, you can set up a middleware where it exchanges the OAuth code for a JWT token. Other than that, if you're just going to use regular username and password and sign in through the auth provider through there, the auth provider should issue a JWT token back, right? So essentially that JWT token, right, it's going to look like this. It's always going to take the shape of a header, payload, and signature, right? And the header.payload and signature, a JWT token is just base64 encoded. What that means is that honestly, like, anyone can see this information here, right? You can see the signature, right? That's fine. It's publicly available to anyone whenever you get a JWT token. You can see a header, you can see the payload, but this is base64 encoded. Does that mean it's secure? No, because there's websites like JWT token where you can just decrypt it and then you can get information, right? Again, this is the payload, right? The payload contains username, email, so on, whatever they encode into it. The header typically contains the algorithm, the type, and so on. The algorithm used to encode the JWT, the type is the JWT, and so on. The signature is the more interesting bit. Signature doesn't really provide any meaningful information to us in terms of decoding it back to its original form, but the signature is essentially something that is provided by Supabase, and it's basically, I believe, now don't quote me, but I believe it's basically the hash of like the header and payload, and then you sign it with the private key that is stored on their server, right? Is that right? Let's learn together. So, dash chat. Does a JWT token's signature comes from the hash of the header.payload plus the signature. Plus it being signed by the private key stored in the server. Private key, hash signed by private key. Okay, so yeah, or how is your, let me just verify it. How does JWT signature get created? Taking the encoded header and payload, combining them with a period, and running them through a cryptographic algorithm. Okay, nice. So my understanding is somewhat right? You just take the header.payload, hash it, run it through some algorithm, and then sign it with a private key. Now, the idea is that this auth provider is the one that contains the private key, right? We don't have access to this private key. This is all held within the auth provider, right? But what the auth provider does expose to us is a set of JWKs. Now, JWKs are JSON web keys that usually contains an array of keys, right? I believe this could be a EC key. What an EC key is just an elliptic curve key. That bit doesn't really matter to us in this project setup, but I'm just trying to give a general rundown. Typically what this contains is the key ID, right? What else? Like the algorithm maybe, and other information, right? But the more important one, or I guess since it's an EC key, right, it's going to contain the curve, X, Y. So this stuff right here, this bit right there, is just for the verification part, right? It just takes our JWT token, right, and runs it through some type of math, some type of elliptic curve math that uses this curve, X, Y, and then checks if it verifies, right? That's essentially what that's doing. The KID is the more important bit. Inside the header contains also a KID, right? So our JWT token contains a KID, and the JWKs that this auth provider exposes contains a KID as well. That will tell us that, hey, your JWT token matches with this public EC key, and then use that to verify, right? That's essentially all that is doing. So the kit is just there to help match which EC key we should be doing, right? And then the way we wanted to verify is once we get the matching EC key, right? Let's say that this was our EC key, right? Let me make this green, right? Once we get that valid EC key, then what we're gonna do is retrieve this valid EC key from the JWT case, right? Then inside our service or inside our app, we're basically going to hash the header and payload. So I believe the steps goes like this: hash the header payload, right? And then what we want to do is basically, in a high level, unscramble the signature, right? Unscramble the signature using the X, Y, maybe the curve, I don't know, but X, Y, and whatever the JWT keys exposed with the EC key, and so on. Yeah, so that should be it. Should be that high level idea. I'm gonna take this time to actually set up the project, and then I'm gonna be right back. Alright, I'm back. Just set up the basic Spring Boot project. The way I'm setting it up is through Spring Initializer, right? You can have all your Spring securities or dependencies you want. Maybe from a repository, I'm gonna just keep this on the back burner in case I need extra dependencies that I didn't account for in here. But these should be the basic ones that you really need to get started on this project. So yeah, so make sure I have a .env.dev, right? And then inside, this is my application properties, right? This is what we're gonna be using to basically transport over our env variables from our .env files into our Spring Boot project, right? So all you really need in this case is a Spring Supabase application as a Supabase project URL. Okay, I'm just actually clean up comments. Okay. Alright, so let's start this off, right? For reference, I'm gonna really quick paste in my Supabase project URL. Pause this. Alright, actually, I think I already have it pasted in. Okay. So what we want to do here is we want to start off with, I believe, is the actual security config. So let me see. Give me 1 second. Hold on. Alright, sorry, I had to do something. So we're gonna start off by let's see, java.com stars backend. Let's forget the health endpoint for now. Let's just make an auth feature, right? And inside this auth feature would have our, let's see, what would we need? Well, we first need a config folder, and that config will help us override the Spring security parts, right? Because we want control of the JWT validation part, right? So let's keep a config folder, and inside it, let's just say something like, maybe like security config, Java, right? So let's start with that, right? Let's wait for my LSBs to start working, hopefully. All right, rolling. So public class security config, right? right? Bean is, you can attach beans onto methods, and basically you would attach onto methods that return an object, right? So every time, and since this right here, hold on, public, let me create this bean first. So security filter chain, I believe, yeah, and security filter chain import. Security filter chain. Okay. Security filter chain, HTTP security, right? HTTP throws an exception. And in here, I'm going to look at this as a configuration bean and also enable web security. This part mainly is to override the default Spring security configurations, right? Alright, so again, like what I was saying, beans that are attached to methods typically are basically ran by itself, right? And what this does is that it's going to return a security filter chain, but that security filter chain is going to be stored inside a Spring container for us to use later on, right? So let's actually work on configuring the filter chain. I need another bean as well. This bean will be for CORS configuration. CORS is essentially cross-origin resource sharing. So let me say something like CORS configuration. Public. It's kind of redundant. CORS configure. What was it? Configuration source. There's two types here. I'm gonna go with that one, web.cors. I believe that's the right one. Okay. So public configuration cores, let's name it cores configuration source again. And here all we're doing is, let's introduce a variable, right? Let's say private string origins, or more specifically allowed origins, right? And inside here I'm going to say value, and I believe there should be cores.allowed origin. Okay, cores.allowed origin. Origins plural. Why can't value be resolved as a type? Value Spring factory. Okay, what this essentially does is, hey, look at our application properties and basically export whatever's in our application properties into this variable right here. So these are all our possible allowed origins, right? So this is essentially a environment variable saying, hey, cores allowed origins, set it to, in our case, would probably be localhost 3000. That's where our Next.js is going to be set up, and so on. Okay. Something else I want here, but I'm gonna probably add it later, is the JWT filter. So actually, I'm gonna skip this part for now, and actually I'm gonna work bottom up. So let's start on the JWT service that's going to be responsible for actually authenticating the actual JWT token, right? So service, and let's name it JWT service.shop. Okay. Class JWT service. This would be of type, again, service. This is the actual business logic, right? We need some sort of package. Service package com dot service. Okay. that on my, what is it? Package com. And JWT service. Okay. So first, what we want is a private variable, right, that will contain the URL of our JWK, JSON web keys, right? So again, JWKs are is essentially just a JSON that contains a bunch of web keys, public web keys that we can use to verify our JWT. Typically, the way you get this is simply getting a using a GET request, right? So here, let me just comment this out. So stores the public URL where JWTs live under. Supabase exposes them via a GET request. Okay, that should be fine. What else would we need? We probably need, so this is something that I should probably show you my prompt now. So this is my dependencies, right? We have Lombard, we have the starter web for REST APIs and so on. Starter test, right? The Spring framework for AI, I'm gonna use that later. But this is the part you actually really need, is this part right here, the actual Spring security to actually enable overriding the default Spring security and Nimbus, right? So Nimbus is something that we will work with. As far as my understanding goes, this Nimbus dependency is really only used for, I believe, fetching the JWKs and maybe verifying it, but fetching the JWKs, right? So with that said, let's go to the JWT service, and I'm gonna have something called JWK set, and this is going to hold a security context. JWK set. Okay. Yeah, so it's gonna say it's deprecated. I believe there's a more modern version to use, but the idea is the same. I think it's just a one-line change. But for now, I'm gonna just go with this since this is what I know. I can probably migrate it later, and for whoever's watching it, you guys can migrate it later too. But the idea is the same. Okay. So from here, what this is responsible for is caching the JWKs that we fetch, right? So Nimbus is responsible for caching whatever we get and setting it and storing it into here, right? So let's say that, and the reason why we have to do this is so that we don't have to hit the JWK endpoint every single time. Instead, we can just see, hey, is the response cached? If it is, okay, great, let's reuse whatever is inside this JWK set, right? So JWK set is responsible for holding all our JWKs. Then we fetch, let's just say Nimbus handles caching internally, so we don't have to introduce like Redis or something like that, right? Now we're gonna actually define our own constructor, and inside here I'm gonna export the value from, let's say again, our AMD variables, and it's going to be our Supabase project.url, right? And the endpoint here is maybe I can, alright, I'll modify the endpoint somewhere else later. But this is essentially our project URL, right? And then inside here, let me make this more readable. Okay. So what we want is, let's say our JWK's URL, right? This is the URL that we're going to be hitting, right? our JWK's URL is going to be essentially this project URL plus whatever Supabase provides for us. What's the endpoint that Supabase allows us to hit? Supabase endpoint for JWKs. Auth v1. So this is the part we want, right? So this is the project URL, and this is the auth v1 jwks.json, right? Nice. Okay, so that should be it. Then we want to convert this. Let's create a URI from it. And from that URI, we can create a URL. URL is right to URL. Okay, nice. Unhandled exception. What does that mean? You have to wrap this in a try catch. So it's saying this could throw an exception, so we just have to catch it, essentially. Throw new, maybe illegal state exception. Is that one? Let's use the string version. Don't know what that one is. Fail to initialize the JWK's URL. Right? Okay, nice. And let's move this all to here. And this should be it. Lastly, we want to set the JWK set. This .jwk set is equal to JWK set. Here is going to be, actually, I don't think I need anything there. URL. Okay. Again, it's saying deprecated, right? But later on, we can always just migrate it to the newer version. For now, I'm going to keep it like this. This is what I've learned. So, yeah. Okay. Perfect. So what is this doing, right? We're setting a constructor. Inside the constructor, we're going to pass in the project URL. That's going to be imported by Spring Boot itself based on our env variable. Then we're going to construct the JWK's URL, which is just the project URL, the Supabase project URL, plus whatever endpoint this is. Create the URI from it. Then from the URI, create the URL, and then just store the JWKs inside this JWK set. Again, the reason is to store for caching, right? So we don't have to hit the endpoint every single time. Construct URL, yeah. All right, that part looks good. Now let's actually work on the validation logic, right? So, we actually want something to determine if a JWT token is valid. So I'm gonna say public boolean, right? Boolean is valid. This is going to take in the token, right? We're gonna represent the token as a string. So here is what I'm thinking, right? Determine if JWT token is valid, right? Param token string representing JWT, and this will return a boolean 1 for valid, 0 for valid. Okay. Let's just return false. Okay, so the way we want to work with this is basically we have the JWT token and we want to parse it. And luckily, again, Spring Boot or Spring Security has a class for us called sign JWT, right? I believe, where is it? Signed JWT, right? And it's a signed JWT because our JWT is signed. It's the token that has a signature with it, right? So I'm gonna say JWT and set that equal to signed JWT.parse token. Okay. Unhandled expression. We have to wrap this inside a try catch as well. Catch exception. I'm gonna just say return false here. Okay. Okay. From there, what we want to do is actually, so remember, our set essentially contains all the possible JWT tokens, or JWKs that we can use to help verify our own JWT token, right? So it could look something like this, right? This could have the kid, right? The algorithm, maybe the curve, the x, the y, right? Okay, so that has it. What we want to do is get the EC key. Again, these are called EC keys as well, because I like the curve key, right? What we want to do is essentially get the one where our JWT token, our header's kid matches the kid of the EC key, of one of the EC keys in this set right here. So maybe we could say, how do we want to do this? So EC key, right? And this is the public key that was exposed to us. And maybe let's say get key and pass in our JWT, right? So now we have to create a function. It's just a helper function, so let's make it private. EC key, right, is get key, sign JWT, okay, should be it. Then what we want is the key ID is equal to JWT get header, I believe. What is it? Get key ID. Okay, so we're getting the key ID of our own JWT token, right? And then from there, what we want is Nimbus provides a JWK selector that basically selects the JWK from the set that matches the key, which is super nice. So selector, and then I'm gonna say new JWK selector and JWK matcher, right? This is the one that actually matches our key ID to the key IDs, the possible key IDs in our set, right? So I'm gonna say, what was it? New JWK matcher, I believe. JWK matcher, and I'm gonna use the dot builder, dot key ID. Key ID and dot build. Okay, so what is this line doing, right? We're essentially saying, based on our key ID, right, create a JWK matcher, right, through the builder, right? So create a JWK matcher class through the builder and set its key ID property to key ID, and then set it equal to this JWK selector. So this will be helpful for us in determining, okay, which out of these EC keys are the ones that match with our own JWT token based on the key ID, right? So from there, let's say keys is equal to JWK set. Unhandled expression. Remote key source exception. Maybe I can just use exception. Okay, we're gonna say this function can throw an exception and we're gonna catch it in here. Okay, sounds good. Now, so this is the part that actually, we're using the selector, right, that we built from here, and from that selector, we're using that to help us find the matching key ID within our JWK set. So in here we're saying if keys is equal to null, or let's say keys dot is empty, right? Then basically there is no key found. So that there's meaning that there is no matching JWK that we found, and possibly this JWT is fake, or we're gonna say unauthenticated, right? So we're gonna say Jose exception, no matching key ID found in JWK's key ID. Okay, nice. Constructor is undefined. Jose exception. What was it? This one? Oh, stupid. Okay. And it's actually throw. Okay. Nice, 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 nice. And lastly, we just want to return. What do you want to do? Yeah, first get the first matching EC key. We're saying first because there's a possibility where there's multiple matching EC keys, because let's say the key was rotated from Supabase, and in that instance we just want to get the first one because that should represent the most recent one that we should be using. And we just want to convert this into an EC key through type match or type casting. Oh my gosh, why is it doing that? Okay, perfect. So we have get key in place, right? This is just simply a helper to get the matching EC key from and JWT. Okay. So we have that. Now what do we want to do with the matching EC key that we just got? What we want to do is basically verify through Nimbus, right? Or through JWT, right? Basically have all the information we want, and this is the cool part where it abstracts all that verification array, right? We don't need to do the math, we don't need to do anything, we just need to run it through a function, right? So boolean verify JWT verify, I think it's this one, and public key. Constructor EC is undefined. Interesting. Constructor is undefined. Did I import it right? I believe so. Why is it saying it's undefined? Isn't it this right here? Interesting. Let's go back. Okay. Let's continue on. I'll fix that later. So basically, if it's not verified, right, what do we want to do? We want to return false, right? Now, there's a possibility where it is verified, right? But again, JWTs have an expiration date on them as well. So in the case that the JWT is expired, we want to say that it is not authenticated as well, right? So we're going to say date expiration, get claim JWT claim set, and then get the expiration time. Okay. Now if expiration then return false as well. Okay, what is it saying? Uploads. Cannot convert from JWT to java.sql date. Okay. I still don't know why this is giving me an error. Oh, you know what? It might be this one. No? This one. Interesting. It's weird. So, links. Why is it saying it's undefined? We get the public key. The public key is of type EC key. And then, it's just my neovim, maybe. Let's check here. Source main. Service, right? Okay, interesting. Wonder why it's saying all of this. Cannot resolve constructor. Okay, I recently just installed this IDE, so don't look at all the errors. I think it's just that I have to set up my language in this IDE, which I'm using Java 25. Okay, anyways, like this is not even getting the var, I believe. But I have it imported, so should be using these. Okay, let's go back to here. Let's say this. Let's go to here. Right? How come I'm getting an error? What was it? Related to the JWT.verify saying that ECDS, something like that, right? Verifier is undefined. Is it? Oh, nice, I know. Interesting. I'm gonna fix this real quick. Okay, I found the issue. I had, what was it? I had colliding imports, right? So we should be using the one from Nimbus. Do not use the one from Java Security. Alright, nice. Let's add this just to the staging area. Okay. Nice. So that should be it for the JWT service, I believe. If I need anything more, then I'll just come back to it. Then, what we want now is to actually create our own JWT filter, right? So again, what I'm referring to is one of these is a JWT filter, right? We essentially just want to override that filter. So what we want, let's go back to our config, and then let's say that we have this, right? Let's say an auto wire JWT filter, it's not picking that up. Wire. Maybe. Why is it not picking that up? Let's import for it. Import for auto wire. Okay, nice. Okay, so JWT filter again is throwing an error because we didn't create that class, right? But essentially we want to create our own JWT filter, right? So let's go back into here, auth, let's create a filter, and JWT filter.java. Okay, nice. So public class JWT filter component. Ooh, hold on, why is my autocomplete not working? Okay. And then we want a package con.authFilter. Boom. Alright, nice. So what we want again is this JWT filter is actually going to extend from the once per request filter, and so we're essentially overriding that filter and providing our own implementation. So we're going to need to override here and then actually override this function right here. So void do filter internal. So this is just a child class of the once per request filter. So do filter internal is what we want to do inside this filter, right? And what we want is a HTTP servlet. HTTP servlet. It was a request that we're taking in, right? So I'm gonna just say request HTTP servlet. Then we want to spit out the response, right? And then the filter chain. I'm gonna say filter chain. Okay, nice. Nice. And okay. So what we want to do here is basically we want to get the header from the request that's coming in, right? Because the header is the one that's going to contain this JWT token, right? So extract header from the request, right? So what we want is string auth header request get header, and then it should be under authorization, right? Because I believe the way that the standard way of sending JWT tokens is, let's say this is the body, right? Or inside, like this could be, let's see if my TypeScript syntax is here. So I believe it's gonna look something like await fetch, right? URL, right? Then in here, we're gonna have our what is it, like method is a get, right? Then in here, we're going to have, this is our header, I believe, and in here it's probably going to be like authorization, and then I believe it's bearer, and then the actual JWT token, right? Token. Something like this, I believe. And so we're essentially trying to extract and get the bearer, right? So we're going to get the header, right? Is that right? Let me just double check. It's on my mind. How to send JWT token with fetch call TypeScript. Oh, okay, I had to specify it's a header, right? But yeah, that's essentially what it is. Okay, nice. So authorization, right? Did I spell that? Authorization, right? And then what is it saying? Override or implement a super type method. One second. Wait, sorry. So this thing right here, let me see if I can jump to the definition here. Once do filter internal. Where is that? So it's gonna throw these as well. I'm gonna need that. VF. Oh my gosh. Alright. VF. Get that. Go back. Right. Here. Then paste that in. Exception from what is it from? I'm gonna say java.io. Let's find where that's actually from. Do filter or the IO exception. Java.io. Okay. So I think I have that right. Why is it still giving me this error? Once per request filter. That is very, 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 very interesting. For now, I'm gonna just say AutoWire JWT service. Why am I getting that? Alright, let's ask. What is up with these errors? Oh my gosh. Do filter internal. Alright, fine. Okay, so we're getting the auth header, and then from there we want to extract the token from it, right? So let's just say it's null at first, and then we want to parse this bare part. So what we want to do is, first of all, if there's no auth header, right, then you can't even validate a JWT, right? So, or if it doesn't even start with, it must start with a bare, right? So in this case, if it doesn't, then we just want to continue on with the filter, right? And send over the request, the response, and then just return out of there, right? So if no auth header or error, continue on with the filter, right? So that'll be that. Then what we want to do is actually abstract the token, right? So auth header dot substring, and where would it start at? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So start at 7, right? And then from there we can say and token, and then we extract the user ID. Let's say, actually, before we do that, we want to verify this token, right? So using our JWT service, right, is valid. Passing the token. If it's not valid, then what we want to do is continue on with the filter, right? Do filter, test, response, and then return out of here, right? Then next, what we want to do, right, is actually set the user ID in terms of the context, right? So we need some sort of application context to hold like information about the request that's coming in, right? So I'm gonna say outer wire application context. Application context. Then in here we want to extract the user ID from the JWT. So I probably need another function where it's called extract user ID, and we're passing in the token. Let's actually create that now. So JWT service. Let's say here, right? Public. Should return a, what do we want it to return, a UID or a string? It'd probably say string that represents the UID. So extract user ID, right, and then extract token. And here we have the signed JWT, right? So signed JWT, convert that, right, to signed JWT. Throws exception. Signed JWT. And then basically from that signed JWT we want to return the user ID via the subject. Okay. Maybe that's how it goes. Alright, nice. Return user ID from the JWT. I feel like this doesn't really make comments. Okay. Let's go back to here. Extract user ID. Let's use that one. Unhandled exception. Let's go do this then, right? I feel like this can stay there. We can go here. Cache exception. What do we want to do? Let's just do nothing for now. So no user ID. Right. And then from there, right, what we want to do is we want to set the context. So context is essentially the one that's holding information about the request that's coming in, right? So, but we don't want to set it if it's already been set. So what we want to do is, let's say this, right? So set application context given JWT. And now we can say something maybe like security, what was it, context holder? Get context, get authentication, that's equal to null, right? Then we can set it, right? So we're gonna say username, password, authentication token, and then we set this to authentication token as part user ID, right? Set the password to null because we're using JWT, and then set the roles and permissions to new simple. What is it? Is it granted authority? I believe it's user. Okay, nice. Can it not format it like that? Oh, no. Okay. Nice. So there, basically setting the principal. This will be null since this is null since we're using JWT, right? And then roles of the right. Okay, whatever, that's fine. Next we want to attach the metadata about the request that's coming in. Okay, so we want to do auth token, right? This will still be in here. Auth token dot set details, and it should be set to new authentication details. What was it? New web application details source, I believe, and then build the details from the request. Okay. Then we want to add the token, filter chain, to see if user is valid. Right, so security, context, holder, get context, set authentication, auth token. Nice. Okay. after all of this, then you just want to continue on with the filter chain. So do filter request response. Okay. Nice. Yeah. Okay. 1 second. Alright. So let's continue on. I believe we're almost done. We just need to set the security config. Now we have a JWT filter. Right. Okay. Nice. This message should return result type. Okay, so this is the part where we get to configure what URLs are permitted, which one are authenticated, which ones aren't authenticated, setting up cores, and so on, right? So, okay, let's do this, right? Setting up the cores, right? So this would just be our configuration source function, right? And we're gonna pass in the cores configuration source function. Type mismatch cannot convert from HTTP security to did I import the wrong one? Is there more? I think this one is bugging out. Let's go back to the config. package.con.start. Clearly it does though. This might be an editor issue. Let me just fix this. Oh god, okay, so I was doing the rest of the code. I just got back. I just got lunch with my girlfriend, with my wife. But I thought I was recording with my mic on, but apparently not. So, is this the video? Yeah, there's no, okay. But essentially what I did, right, I was setting up the security filter chain config, right? So we're saying our cores is going to be the cores that we initialize here. That's our cores config. CSRF, we disable CSRF because we're not using that. We're using JWT, right? Authorized HTTP request. This is basically saying, this first 2-bit is saying disable any type of authentication needed for any error handling so that we can get a proper 401 instead of just a server error, I believe. For request managers, these are the endpoints that don't require any authentication. We created a health endpoint called ping. It's just a way to see if our server is actually starting, right? And typically you also need a health endpoint for elastic load balancing, for our load balancer to hit this endpoint every single time to ensure that the server is up and running. And then any other request is going to be authenticated. Here we're just enabling REST access, right? Session management, this is just saying that our server has to be stateless. And we're adding our JWT filter, and yeah, that's basically it for that. So now we're setting up the cores config, right? This is cross-origin resource sharing, so we can communicate to our client. New cores configuration. Okay, split the allowed origins, assuming comma delimited. Okay. So for string origin, what was it? Allowed origins dot split at something like this, right? And then config dot add allowed origin dot trim. Okay. Basically, I'm allowing the origin specified by my environment variables. Depending on if I'm on dev or prod, it can look something like this, right? or and I can have a comma to allow any other origins that I want, right? That's why I'm splitting it by comma separated. Then I would actually have to allow any headers, right? Let's go like this. Config. Allow any method, and then config.set allow credentials true. Let me comment this out. So allow any type of headers. So allow all headers, right? Allow all HTTP methods. Allow cookies, auth, and etc. Right. Finally, URL based course configuration source. Should be good. This is saying to apply course config to all backend endpoints. Then lastly, I just want to return source. Okay, nice. There's still an error. It's this part right here. Package com.stars backend.auth.config. You see, I'm like, how does this not match it? It's literally the same, I swear. So let's see if I do this, right? Package. Like what? How is that not the same? Okay, this has to be my editor that's throwing the issue. This is the only issue that I have. Alright, let me fix this first. Alright, I'll be back. Oh god. Okay, so the issue was that my project was open on the wrong directory through NeoVim. So my Java server, my Java LSP was not picking up the right root directory for this project. Alright, anyways, that should conclude it. I'm gonna go ahead and commit this real quick. And yeah, actually before I do, let's test it out first. Let's see, Backend Spring. Actually, I should probably set up some type of, okay. I'm gonna be back. I'm gonna set up some type of Docker compose files and then a script to start my backend. So I'll be back. Okay, I'm back. Just had AI generate me a startup script to actually run this backend, right? I could run it, but that would mean I have to export all my env variables. So I thought I should just make a script. Commented it out. Just get the directory of the script, get the root directory, get the mode specified by the script, right? So it could be start backend.sh, and then space dev or space prod. 1 second, someone's calling me. Okay, sorry, I had a call. So dev prod, right? You can run it like that. Handle cases, if in dev, right, set the env file that we want to use and set the default profile to dev, right? Then if there's no env file, exit with an error, then source the env file and export it to the terminal, right? So this is basically exporting it to the terminal. Then Spring profile is active, set it based on the default profile that we initialized here. Run the program, right? and then we're seeding to the script directory, we're running it through that script directory, right, because that's where we want to start the backend, and then we're gonna run it. That should basically be it. I don't have this one. That was for my old projects, so I think this should be good. Hopefully, we're gonna see. Dot / start backend sh permission deny. And we'll go here, missing env file. Oh, okay. It's because I'm using my old projects directory. What is it? Stars. That again. Hopefully, success. Looking good. Okay, so our server started on port 8080, right? Let's see if this is working as intended. If it is, then we know that this ping controller should be able to be hit without any authentication, and the secure should return us a 401. Sorry, that was my... Okay. HTTP localhost 8080. And then, what was it? API v1 health. Is that it? Okay, so I'm getting a forbidden for health. I need to say ping. Okay, so the public endpoint is working, right? Let's say secure ping. Is that what it was? No, it's just secure. Secure. Okay, nice. Now we're getting a 403, a forbidden, right? So that should be it. That should be the project setup, right? Real quick. I'm gonna then do this. JWT authentication. Right, and then I'm gonna actually set up a Docker compose file. Might as well, since this is part of the setup of the project. Let's go Docker compose YAML recording. Okay. And then we're gonna say, let's just say version 3.8. We would want a Postgres container, so I'm gonna say that for now. I haven't configured that with Spring JPA yet, but that's fine. This is the version of Postgres to use. What do I want to name it? I should say stars Postgres, right? Restart always. Let's make this so that restart the Postgres container if crash. Environment Postgres user, just say stars, right? Postgres password is, let's just say stars again. Postgres DB or stars dev. Ports is 5433, 5432, I believe. So we're exposing the containers port to 5433, containers port to 5433, and whenever a request hits that port, right, we're going to forward it to the Postgres port, which is 5432. Okay. And we want to attach some volumes on here. Postgres, I believe data var, Postgres QL data persist to disk between restarts. So that's what that's for. Next we want a Redis one, right? So image, just say Redis 7. Then container name is going to be stars Redis. Restart always, expose port 6379 and forward it to 6379 still. Again, I'm just following my old Docker Compose file. Basically, we're not changing the port at which this is exposed. I think this is just good practice though. This is what I found from documentation before. So volumes, Redis, data, and yeah. Next, we want RabbitMQ, image, RabbitMQ3 management, container name would be stars, RabbitMQ, right, and then star always as well. And then ports, this one has 2 ports because they allow us to have a dashboard. So 5672, right, forwarded to 5672, that can stay the same. And then what port do I want? 15672. 15672. Okay, perfect. Environments, RabbitMQ default user guest and set the password to guest as well. For volumes, we want one at RabbitMQ data lib RabbitMQ. Nice. Okay. For the volumes, right. And the Postgres data, the Redis data, and RabbitMQ data. And that should be it for the setup. Alright, you have to do something, so that has to be it.